1 year ago, I watched in horror as Karen from the HOA destroyed my veteran father's memorial garden, only to reveal at their own meeting that I owned every property they stood on. Now they're back, and this time with government power behind them. I stood among the Purple Heart roses that had regrown after Karen ripped them out with her manicured hands last year. The garden my father had lovingly tended for decades was now a community centerpiece, honoring his 32 years of military service. But as veterans gathered to share war stories, I noticed 3 men in expensive suits photographing our properties from the street. Strange. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Martinez. "Sarah, did you approve the surveyors? They're measuring my property line." I hadn't approved anything. That night, an official-looking envelope arrived at my door. Inside was a notice from the county about eminent domain proceedings affecting Willow Creek Estates. My hands trembled as I read further. They planned to build a highway extension right through our community, cutting directly across my father's memorial garden. But the biggest shock came when I turned the page and saw who was leading the development consortium behind the highway project. There, listed as the lead consultant, was a name I'd hoped to never see again. Karen Williams. She was back. And this time, she had the government on her side. The next morning, I contacted every homeowner in Willow Creek Estates, calling an emergency community meeting. As twilight fell, concerned neighbors filled our community center, the same room where I'd exposed Karen's schemes a year ago. The mood was different now, less triumphant, more fearful. "This highway proposal came out of nowhere," said Tom Rodriguez, spreading maps across the table. "According to these plans, they'll demolish 13 homes, including yours, Sarah, and the memorial garden would become an off-ramp." Peter Chen, who had recorded Karen destroying my father's garden last year, stood up. "This feels personal. The highway could easily be rerouted through the vacant land east of us. Someone's deliberately targeting our community." Mrs. Martinez, now our community council president, adjusted her glasses. "Sarah, even with you owning the land beneath our homes, can they still force us out through eminent domain?" I took a deep breath. "Unfortunately, yes. Eminent domain gives the government power to take private property for public use with just compensation. But there are ways to fight it if we can prove the taking isn't necessary or truly for public use." As the meeting continued, David, the former HOA board attorney who had recognized the legitimacy of my trust documents last year, approached me quietly. "Sarah, I've been researching Karen since she left. She landed at Westland Development Partners, the same company she tried to bring in before. They specialize in getting government contracts for infrastructure projects. So she's using her connections to get revenge?" I asked. David nodded grimly. "And I found something else. One of the county commissioners who'll vote on this highway project is her brother-in-law." The next day I took a personal day from the law firm and drove to the county records office. Mrs. Thompson was still there, and her eyes widened when she saw me. "Sarah Henderson, I was going to call you. Someone's been requesting every record related to your father's land trust. They've been here almost daily for weeks." "Let me guess. Karen Williams?" Mrs. Thompson shook her head. "Not her personally, but lawyers from Westland Development. They've been extremely interested in finding any technical flaw in the trust's formation. I spent hours combing through records, looking for anything that might help our case. As I was leaving, my phone rang. An unknown number. "Sarah Henderson? This is Commissioner James Wilson from the County Transportation Board. I was hoping we could meet privately to discuss the Willow Creek situation." The meeting was set for an upscale restaurant downtown. Commissioner Wilson was in his 60s, well-dressed, with the practiced smile of a career politician. "Ms. Henderson, I wanted to speak with you directly. This highway project is going to happen. The votes are already lined up. But there could be room for adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" I asked, already suspecting where this was heading. "Westland Development has identified your property as particularly problematic due to some unusual ownership structure. They're prepared to offer triple the market value for your home specifically if you sign today and encourage your neighbors to accept the inevitable." I kept my voice steady. "And the memorial garden? The one honoring my father and other veterans?" He waved dismissively. "We can put up a plaque somewhere along the new highway. Much more visible that way." "Commissioner Wilson, are you aware your brother-in-law's wife works for Westland?" His smile faltered briefly. "Family connections aren't relevant to public works projects, Ms. Henderson, but our position can be costly for everyone involved." I left without signing anything, my mind racing. Back home, I found Peter Chen waiting on my porch, his expression grim. "Sarah, you need to see this." He handed me a stack of papers, notices of building code violations that had been delivered to every home in Willow Creek Estates, each requiring expensive repairs within 30 days. "They're trying to financially break us before the eminent domain proceedings even begin," Peter said. "Most of our elderly residents can't afford these repairs, especially knowing their homes might be demolished anyway." That night, as I worked late reviewing the trust documents, my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was Mrs. Martinez, tears streaming down her face. "They just taped this to my door," she sobbed, handing me a final eviction notice. "They claim my property taxes were calculated incorrectly for the past 3 years because of the trust arrangement. Either I pay $27,000 in back taxes by next week, or they'll seize my home." I knew then that this wasn't just about a highway. This was Karen's systematic revenge against everyone who had stood against her last year, especially the descendants of the original trust families. The phone calls continued all night. Similar tax notices had been delivered to the Rodriguez family and the Chens. It was clear they were picking us apart one by one, using every governmental tool at their disposal. And unlike last time, I couldn't simply dissolve a HOA board to fix this. This was war, fought with legal documents, government agencies, and public opinion, and we were losing. 2 weeks later, we suffered our first major defeat. Despite community protests, the county board voted 4-1 to approve the highway project, with only one commissioner citing serious concerns about the selection of this particular route. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about progress coming to Willow Creek, despite resistance from a few homeowners, complete with quotes from Karen about how sometimes individual sentimentality must give way to the greater good. The community was fracturing under pressure. 3 families had already accepted buyout offers, including the Johnsons, who couldn't afford to fix the suddenly critical code violations on their fixed income. Each sale weakened our united front. I worked every night trying to find legal grounds to challenge the eminent domain proceeding, but the odds seemed insurmountable. Then came the personal attack. I was served with a lawsuit claiming that my father had misrepresented the trust's legal status years ago, potentially invalidating the entire arrangement. The plaintiff? A shell company that David traced back to Westland Development. The final blow came when bulldozers appeared at the edge of our community, beginning clearing work on adjacent properties. Despite our insistence that they couldn't legally enter our properties yet, the construction crew accidentally knocked down the community sign and damaged the edge of the memorial garden. When I confronted the foreman, he shrugged. "Just following orders, ma'am. You might want to save those plants. This'll all be pavement soon anyway." That night, standing in the partially trampled garden, I found my father's Purple Heart medal half buried in the dirt where his plaque had stood. As I wiped it clean, something inside me hardened. Dad hadn't survived 2 tours in Vietnam to have his memory erased by bureaucrats and developers. I had one last card to play. Risky, potentially career-ending but our only hope. The next morning, I called James Martinez, my colleague at the law firm, who had helped me research the property records last year. James, remember how you said you owed me for helping with the Westbrook case? I need that favor now, and it's a big one. Anything, Sarah. Your dad helped my family when no one else would. I need you to pull every record of land sales, political donations, and contract awards involving Commissioner Wilson, Westland Development, and anyone connected to them for the past decade. 2 days later, James delivered a thumb drive. Sarah, what they're doing to your community is just the tip of the iceberg. This highway project isn't just revenge. It's part of a pattern. I spent the entire weekend analyzing the data, creating a complex web of connections on my living room wall. By Sunday night, I had what I needed. Meanwhile, the community rallied in unexpected ways. Mrs. Martinez organized the seniors to create a human chain around the memorial garden. The Rodriguez family's son, a journalism student, began documenting the accidental damages to our properties. Peter Chen, who worked in IT, discovered that the county had never conducted the legally required environmental impact study for the highway project. Monday morning, I executed phase 1 of my plan. I didn't go to the county commissioners or the courts. Instead, I walked into the offices of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, carrying 3 carefully organized binders of evidence. My name is Sarah Henderson, I told the agent at the desk. I'd like to report a pattern of corruption, bribery, and misuse of public funds involving County Commissioner James Wilson, Westland Development Partners, and the Willow Creek Highway Project. 4 hours later, after detailed interviews with 2 federal agents, I emerged with their assurance that they would investigate. But I knew federal investigations took time we didn't have. The bulldozers were still scheduled to start demolition in 2 weeks. For phase 2, I reached out to every media contact I had. The Rodriguez's son helped me create a compelling visual presentation showing how the highway route had been changed from its original path specifically to target our community, particularly the homes of those who had opposed Karen last year. By Wednesday, 2 local news stations had run segments questioning the highway project. By Friday, a regional newspaper published an investigative piece titled Highway Robbery, The Curious Case of Willow Creek Estates, highlighting the family connections between Commissioner Wilson and Westland Development. But the real turning point came when Peter Chen discovered something extraordinary while digging through his grandfather's papers. The original land donation that had made the current highway possible decades ago had come from our 4 founding families, with a deed restriction requiring any future expansions to avoid residential displacement. They can't legally build through our community, Peter explained, showing me the faded document. Not without violating the original grant conditions, which would revert the entire highway system back to the original owner's heirs, us, armed. With this new information, we prepared for the final confrontation at the special county meeting scheduled to address the growing controversy. The room was packed with residents, reporters, and, sitting confidently in the front row, Karen Williams with the Westland executives. When my turn came to speak, I approached the podium calmly, placing my father's Purple Heart medal where everyone could see it. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge Commissioner Wilson's brother-in-law in the audience today, the VP of Westland Development, who's set to make millions from this unnecessary highway route that will destroy a veterans' memorial garden and displace elderly residents, many of whom are veterans themselves. Murmurs spread through the crowd as cameras turned toward a red-faced man sitting beside Karen. I also want to thank the FBI agents in the back of the room who are here following our meeting as part of their ongoing investigation into potential corruption surrounding this project. Commissioner Wilson's face went pale as several heads turned toward 2 serious-looking individuals standing against the wall. But most importantly, I'd like to direct the board's attention to this document. The original land grant from 1952, with a legally binding restriction that prohibits any highway expansion from displacing residential properties. I projected the document on the screen behind me, highlighting the critical language. My father and the other founding families of Willow Creek donated the land for the original highway with this specific protection in place. If you proceed with this route, you trigger the reversion clause, which would require the county to surrender not just the new construction, but the entire existing highway back to the founding family's heirs. My legal team has prepared immediate injunction papers that will be filed the moment you vote to proceed. The room erupted. Commissioner Wilson called for order, his voice strained. These are serious allegations that will require legal review before we can proceed. Karen stood up, her designer suit immaculate as always. This is clearly a desperate delay tactic. The Henderson Trust documents were thoroughly vetted by our legal team and... Actually, interrupted David, rising from his seat, as the former counsel who reviewed those documents last year, I can confirm their legitimacy. And having examined this highway grant restriction, I can assure the board it creates a legally enforceable covenant that runs with the land. The meeting dissolved into chaos as commissioners huddled with their attorneys. After a tense half-hour recess, the board returned with a unanimous vote to indefinitely pause the Willow Creek Highway extension pending further legal review and exploration of alternative routes. As the crowd celebrated, Karen stormed toward the exit, but I intercepted her. You know what the difference is between us, Karen? My father taught me that leadership means protecting people, not exploiting them. Her eyes narrowed. This isn't over, Sarah. There are other ways to develop Willow Creek. You're right about one thing, I replied. It isn't over. The FBI has some questions about certain financial transactions between Westland and Commissioner Wilson's private consulting company. I believe they'd like to speak with you next. 6 months later, Willow Creek Estates had transformed again. The highway was being constructed along its original planned route, bypassing our community entirely. Commissioner Wilson had resigned to spend more time with family after the FBI investigation expanded to include multiple projects. Karen and 2 Westland executives were awaiting trial on corruption charges. But the most meaningful change was happening in my father's garden. What had begun as one veteran's memorial had expanded into a community remembrance space with sections honoring service members from every era. The county, under new leadership, had even designated it as a protected historical site. On a crisp, autumn evening, as golden light bathed the garden, I found Mrs. Martinez placing fresh flowers by my father's plaque. Your father was always playing the long game, she said, smiling. He knew someday someone would try again. I nodded, touching the weathered trust documents I'd brought to show her some repairs needed to the binding. The battle for a community never really ends, I replied, but neither does its memory. As children played freely around us, their laughter echoing where bulldozers had once threatened, I knew my father's legacy was secure, not just in documents or plaques, but in the community he'd built to last.